Hello and welcome to a special series coming from the BlabberMouths. BlabberMouths are usually 10 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday nights with Andy Milne and Nicholas Enlick and myself, Justin Schleider. This is BlabberMouths 101. Tonight here with Seth Martin going over TGFU. He will tell us from the beginning the what, the how, and the why, which is important. But before we do that, we will go to the best intro ever created by our friend and co-host tonight, Jorge Rodriguez.
You are a blabbermouth!
Ladies and gentlemen,
I do not say blah, blah, blah.
Nice. I always love that last part. Always makes me laugh. All right, Jorge, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to those who have been stuck under a rock for the past couple of years and do not know who Jorge Rodriguez is.
So I'm Jorge Rodriguez. I'm a physical education teacher from Houston, Texas, and I'm the producer of the Global Phys Ed Boxcast. So if you like podcasts, check out the Global Phys Ed Boxcast. Justin is on pretty much every single one of those as well. We interview teachers and physical education teachers from all around the world, so check it out if you like podcasts.
Yeah, if it has to do with phys ed or health or anything with that, we are interviewing those people to help you out. All right, Mr. Martin, what's going on down there? Tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Seth Martin. I teach K through 5 physical education up in South Lake Tahoe, California. Otherwise, active in my state organization and just got back from the awesome PE Institute, so super fired up and starting to get ready for this new school year.
Nice. So I'm very
and Seth is an avid Pokemon Go player. I should add that.
Nice. So we are here to start the BlabberMouths 101 episode 1, which is great. And we're going to an expert in TGFU. So for those phys ed teachers who don't know what TGFU is, can you tell us a little bit about that, please, Seth?
So Teaching Games for Understanding is a inquiry-based model where you come to the students and you're trying to help guide them to discovering strategies, discovering things that will work for them, and to be able to give them the tools to transfer those between the 4 categories of TGFU, which TGFU has 4 groups. It has target games, which is considered the most simple. Then you get into striking and fielding. Then you have net and wall, and you have invasion type games. All of those pretty much encompass any sport you could think of. And the goal is, no matter what activity you're doing, if it's within that realm, so anything within invasion games, you can take whatever you figure out and put it into the next one. So you could learn something playing basketball and roll it into soccer. And it should just go right across, and the students are in control of that. You're not going as the knowledge bringer, telling the kids everything that they should know. It's on them to discover it. And sometimes it's a whole path to get there, but you start learning really the depth of your students' knowledge.
Fantastic. Jorge, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just one of the things that I really love about TGFU is that constructivist approach to physical education, and like really accessing the students' prior knowledge and using that like as a building block and bringing other students into that learning environment, and then creating new knowledge from that. So that's what I really like about TGFU, is that it's a real student-centered approach.
All right. So far we have student-centered approach, bringing prior knowledge in, a little more onus on the student on their learning instead of the sage on the stage. I'm hearing a little more guide on the side, which is what general education seems to be aiming towards. So any other reasons why TGFU should be used in the classroom or can effectively be?
I'm all about, one of the things that I just love about it is that you discover those students who understand but maybe can't do yet. I had a student who was that student who, you know, they were the nice kid, they weren't the most skillful, they didn't cause problems, so they weren't always on your radar. But doing some exit tickets at the end of a lesson, using kind of the overarching inquiry question for the day, I was able to find out she understood. She couldn't quite apply it yet and do it, but she got it. She understood what was going on. And once she gets the skills, she'll be successful. Whereas, you know, you got your athletes, they're always going to look good. If you're playing sports, they're always going to look like they've got it. But she could show me that she understood it. And I've seen even the engagement go up because the students are realizing that, hey, this is about me. And we're not going to get anywhere if I don't involve myself. So that's been a huge part of me going this direction.
Yeah, so if I can add something to that, one of the great things that I've seen in my experience with TGFU is the student engagement. Like I feel like the student engagement really goes up because you're learning the skill, you're learning the concept of the game through a game. So it might be a modified game, it might be you know, a more simplified version of the game, but at the same time you're learning like a beginner skills or a level 1 type skill towards achieving, you know, I guess towards achieving mastery of that game. But the level of engagement really goes up because you always have those kids who come into your class and say, well, what are we playing? And so with TGFU, you get them started right off the bat in playing a game that's associated with like a small-sided game that's associated with a large-scale game.
All right. So right now I'm hearing that student engagement goes up. So right away I'm excited about that. The more students are engaged, the better, the more learning opportunities there are, the easier my class becomes for myself as well, from a personal standpoint. But let me do a little pushback and tell me where I'm wrong here. So if you roll up and you tell me, all right, I'm going to play a game, I always tell them, well, we can't play the game yet because you don't have the skills to play the game. That would be like doing multiplication, you know, of 3 digits when you don't know multiplication of 1 digit yet. Where am I off with my thinking? How is it that we could go right into a game when we haven't practiced or taught the skills yet? Where am I off there?
I think, at least for my experience or how I'm approaching it with my students, that they have a base. They may not be that 5 of 5 critical components and critical elements, but they have the ability to throw. They've shown me that they can catch in younger years. Like invasion games, I don't bring in full-on invasion games until really they're getting into 3rd grade, and that's all with the body, no implements. And really building through that and seeing what my students know. But then there's a point where those 5 of 5 critical elements, how many times are you going after them to hit them before you need to give them a context, a purpose behind their throwing and catching and all of that. And in doing that purpose, they start realizing the value of, you know, really using some of those critical elements. Because sometimes it's easy, you get that kid who's a great athlete who will just stand there and toss the ball to their partner, you know, very little effort. Once there's the purpose behind it, now they're re-engaged to why they have to do it. And then also giving that transfer. I mean, again, I talk about this video all the time. It's a James Mendango video that's on YouTube where he has a group of students and he's like, I know you guys can throw and catch. What's going on? And they're playing an active game similar to team handball. And in that game, nobody's catching it. And he inquires with his students, you know, what's going on? Why did that happen? And the students reply with pressure. I've never had to catch with pressure. We haven't thrown with pressure. And that whole different scenario with the skill is what you're trying to do. You're trying to put it in context where now they can get it. Because you could get a kid with 5 of 5 critical elements, but if they can't use it, you know, what's the point?
Yeah, that's funny. I sit at a gym. I summer camp that's in the gym, and I can shoot threes all day. I'm shooting like 60, 70%. I'm killing it. I'm thinking I'm awesome. Every Wednesday night I go play. I'm at like 20 and 30% when there's a guy in my face and my legs are tired and I'm out of breath. So I definitely see the validity there. Anything you want to add about the why, Jorge?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, just kind of piggyback on what Seth said. I think he hit the nail on the head when you're talking about the purpose of the activity. So even with your analogy, when you're talking about math skills or multiplication, if there's no purpose, then the students tend to lose engagement because they don't see how to practically use that. But in TGFU, you hit that right off the bat. So this is why you're doing these certain skills. This is why you're throwing overhand. This is why you have to have the proper form when you're throwing overhand. And in addition to that, your proper form is gonna change. So in different situations, in different scenarios, you might have to adjust your overhand throw. So it's not always as simple as you're hitting the 5 critical elements. Sometimes that has to change. So I think putting them in that game scenario really kind of emphasizes that point.
Yeah, and for me, the setting up and all right, we're gonna go skill for the first class, we're gonna go skill for the second class, and then okay, I think most of us have progressed enough that now we can hit the game. It's boring. It's literally boring for them. So I see what you both are talking about with engagement. So I think that I understand the what. I'm pretty good with the why. This is where I struggle. The how. I'm ready to implement TGFU. And coming from a personal standpoint, I'm ready. I'm sold. I understand the importance. The kids come up. When are we playing the game? When are we playing the game? What game are we playing today? I look at general education, game-based learning. We're there. The kids want to learn by playing games. They want to play games. Engagement's high. It's fun. We have the music blasting. I'm ready. Now comes the hard part. And this is why I'm really excited that Seth and Jorge are here. How do I do this? Take me from the very beginning, how I'm going to do this for, let's say, a 5th grade level, 4th or 5th grade level. How does that sound, Seth?
So with my students, one of the first things that I'm looking at is let's talk on an invasion. So if we're looking at invasion type games, can they invade a territory with just their body? Because if they can't safely invade with their body, you throw things into their hands, they're not going to get. Also, if they don't understand how to just move their body to invade and the basic idea of it, then nothing else is going to move forward. So starting at that first level, I'll do a variety of games where they're invading with their body and inquiring about how are they being successful, what are they looking for, how are they avoiding defenders in those games. So an example, I actually did territorial sharks and minnows, where the sharks actually had a region, and I basically made little quadrants, and the shark only could defend that quadrant. So the kids had to figure out how to get through each sharks. And one of the other things I asked was, okay, what about the shark did you have to take into consideration? So if it was one of the fast kids, they had to approach it differently than another kid. Or if it was a kid who was very focused on one area, how did they use that? So getting them to start identifying just with the body what other people might be doing that then they could use to be a signal or a way to identify, okay, it's time to go, how I go about it. So that's kind of the first step before we ever put anything in our hands.
All right. So we're just using our bodies, not worrying about throwing, not worrying about catching, not worrying about kicking anything, dribbling anything, just using our bodies. And Seth has been fantastic beforehand. He has some standards put together. So for standard 2, E1, grade 4, he has why is open space important for offensive players, applies the concept of closing spaces in small-sided practice tasks. That's just one of them. And we'll put this document at the end. But everything in TGFU is still based on the standards and the grade level outcomes, which is really important because we talk a lot about, oh, it looks good. How does this fit into the grade level outcomes? And Seth has done a lot of the work for us. All right. So are there anything else that we're doing with just the body, just with space, no implements in there for the students to kind of learn where they can go, where they should go? And I'm guessing we're talking about angles here as well, correct?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you can talk about too is even the ways that you going back into, some, at least in California, chase, flee, dodge, and evade is a major standard for 3rd graders. Mm-hmm. And what I'll usually do with those students is start inquiring, how do you chase effectively, and start pulling out the idea of using acceleration, using angles, getting them to identify those components that they might hear later on from a coach, or that they'll realize even if they're slower than another student, if they use the right angle, they can catch them. getting them to identify those strategic pieces. If you're fleeing, realizing that if somebody's using an angle, the last thing you want to do is go straight, that you then want to utilize some of those pathways. So also trying to pull in those concepts from kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and get the students realizing those matter, that those actually have a purpose. And then making sure with those fourth and fifth graders that that's solid and that then they can hopefully roll with it. So I think that's another piece. And also with anything TGFU, play with the rules, that you don't have to follow a set rule. I always think about Joey Fight's layering and, you know, how you make the different levels of an activity. And I know Jorge has a great video on the same thing, where you change the game as they show more and as they develop with their skill set, you make the game more complex, or you add pieces in that are going to make them use more strategies.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on, Seth was talking about questioning and, you know, using again the kids' prior knowledge and their experience in that activity, and then also having that conversation with the group and with you know, kind of like the debate of ideas and how different people were successful at that activity. That's one of the great things about TGFU, is that knowledge is transferred from one individual to another. So it's not just me telling them how to throw. It's not just me telling them how to create space. It's the students figuring out what was successful in that activity, what was successful in that game, and then sharing it out with other students. So that's another great part of TGFU, is that conversation that students have with each other.
All right, so I'm starting, and right away, again, no implements, no projectiles. I'm just using my body. We went over angles. We figured out how to use people's force and momentum against them, you know, with cutbacks and different things. Anything else I need to know about getting started right from there before we build on the next thing?
I think too, one of the key things with TGFU is that you're reading the group. So you could have one class that just rolls through this activity and they've got it and they're ready for the next step. And then you have the next class come, they're a little bit more of a mess and you've got to spend a little bit more time. And I always go into my lessons with kind of an overarching question, but always ready to pull in more. And you might even have to pull aside, you know, a couple kids and ask a question, or walk by a kid. I always think of TGFU, if you're doing it right, moving. You're all over the place. You're able to see what's going on at different angles and different groups of people, and you're able to question those groups. And that the whole group questioning, you can minimize in doing that. And then if I get a question that I've asked, you know, 4 or 5 times, okay, now let's pause everybody, because this is becoming a common question. How do we do this? And like Jorge said, that debate of ideas and debate of how people do it, everyone benefits, because when we start sharing those things, everyone's hearing that terminology being used, whatever the students bringing into the class, it all gets there.
And one of the great things I stole straight from Jorge with his invasion game and his capture the flag was the thing of, you start at one side of the gym, you go to get to the other side of the gym, the defenders are spread out, they can only move 1 foot. And that's another way to go, okay, so if they can only move 1 foot, I have this much room to go by them to the left or right. I can gauge if they only move 1 foot. And then from there, then you build upon that. So I think that's huge about the rules of, you could switch and tweak the rules just a little bit, and then you could build on it more and more. Anything?
Yeah, and I just want to say with the scaffolding issue, I think that's a great way to teach any game, because I mean, I've been there where I tell the kids, you know, 10 different rules to a game, and then by the time we start playing the game, they don't know the rules. And what happens is they start arguing. Well, he's cheating. He didn't do this right. He didn't do that right. But when you give them time to develop in one build of that particular activity, then they fully understand that rule. And then you add to that. So that scaffolding, I think, is really important with any activity, for the kids to really feel comfortable with that rule and how it looks in the game situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think too, with the scaffolding too, you know, as you jump levels, you can increase the complexity. You know, your first build should always be fairly simple. It should allow for a lot of success, whether you're talking how many defenders you have, or, you know, how the game works. Like when I do the sharks and minnows game, if you get tagged, first you're seaweed and you're just kind of moving around, and then that person then can evolve into a jellyfish, and the jellyfish is able to move side to side, and they can actually tag you. So now it's not just an obstacle, now it's a person that can also get you, but they're limited, unlike the sharks. And then building it up so that now, you know, you have to the point where everyone can become a shark. Now you have all these sharks that you have to avoid. How do you avoid that? Like, would you look for the least dense areas, you know, the least dense quadrant, and try to use those? How do you approach it? So as you build it, now you're forcing them to deal with these issues in more and more difficult terms. Just like if you're having defenders and stuff, you even things out as you get further along, depending on who you want to have the advantage or who you want to have developed strategy.
Nice.
Right, and you know, the way I do my invasion game, well, my introduction to the invasion game is through capture the flag, the ultimate capture the flag, and I have that video with the ultimate capture the flag and how I scaffold that, but like Seth was saying, so the first build of it is very simple, and they're just kind of identifying their boundaries, and then I you know, divide the teams, and I have one defensive team and one offensive team, so they start learning their offense and defensive strategies and how to maneuver around those different offensive and defensive situations. And so, like Seth was saying, you know, the level of complexity is more and more as you go through the scaffolding. And then finally, at the end, the last build would be them actually playing the ultimate capture the flag game. So yeah, definitely it's a great way to show kids how to, or introduce the rules of the game while they're playing the game.
Yeah, two things come up for me when you guys are talking. Number one, chunking. A lot of times we give them so much information, 5, 7, 10 rules. And what did Brain Rules say? You can't remember more than 5 things or more than 7 things at a time. So this way you simplify everything. Hey, just become really good at one thing. Then we can build on 2 things, then 3 things, or 4 things. And then the other part that really hit me was when we talk about physical literacy, you always hear the same phrase, confidence and competence. And where does that come from? Where does the confidence come from? Success. And Seth just said it. Hey, your first build should be 96% success. I mean, we aim for 100. Maybe one kid is really, really far behind and can't get it for some reason. But I mean, if everyone's successful, now, okay, good. Now we could go to the next build where if you go backwards and we start with the game first, that's too high, your athletes are succeeding. The kids who have never played before, they're not succeeding. And then suddenly they're demoralized and you lose them. And I think this is a key piece. Like,
and what's great about the TGFU and the constructivist approach is that, you know, even at a beginning build, like everybody in that team has the same goal. So for instance, in capture the flag, everybody has to get to the other side in my first build. So everybody has that same goal. So even if you're not successful, the rest of your team is rooting for you, and they're trying to get you to that other space. So even with those failures, you learn from those failures, and you have the support system around you to make those failures a learning situation for those kids. And sometimes failing is good, you know, sometimes failing is a good thing, as long as you have that safe environment where failing isn't going to demoralize you, but in fact lift you up.
beautiful.
And I think too, like, you don't want to make a game or situation where frustration comes out of it, because if you're looking for them to discover strategies and be thinking through the activity, once they hit frustration, you might lose them and they're not thinking anymore. They don't care and they lose that interest. And then you've lost your opportunity to help them figure out strategic or like any kind of game pieces that they could have got, because they failed, and they failed miserably because your rules were crazy too much. And I think too, even with a lot of the popular sports, it's an assumption that, oh, you got to know this. You've had some kind of exposure to soccer. You should know this. And those are the kids that we already are losing, are the kids who don't have that background. And we want to set them up so they still understand, hey, wait a minute, I get it. I understand this. Like, I understand the concept that will help me. You know, I can do this.
Yeah, and it's funny, about 3 years ago, I came to realize my kids no longer knew the rules of kickball. They didn't know it. And I was like, how do you not know the rules to kickball? Baseball's kind of been going down a little bit. There's a lot of soccer, lacrosse, other sports. And it was the first time I had to go back and actually teach the rules of kickball to, you know, second, third, fourth grade, which was interesting to me. All right, so now we used our bodies. We understand angles. We understand the pathways. Where do I go from here? So I could either do sharks and minnows. I could do, like you talked about, seaweed. So one step to the side, or I'm here just moving my arms. Jellyfish can slide left and right, but not go forward and backwards. My sharks can go anywhere. I'm ready for the next thing. They have this. They understand spacing. They understand angles. Where do I go next?
So for me, I mean, the next step I go to is getting the general ideas for effective passing, and that's effective passing without defenders. So how you can pass it well, and obviously you can start out in a non-dynamic, you know, everyone's standing still, but there's not a lot of time necessary for that, in my opinion, because you've done that. That was the skill building or the experience and the exposure that they had in early years. Now it's more dynamic. So moving around the field, or doing some kind of ultimate type game where they're passing, but there's no defenders. So they can start really getting what they have to do to move. Then you can quickly transition to one defender. And if it's 4 kids versus 1 defender, again, the success rate is going to be high. But there's now a little bit of pressure. There's now a little bit of challenge. And there is somebody trying to work against what they're doing. So the things that you're not seeing when you start asking them what will help effective passing, then that now changes things, because now there's somebody who's trying to make them fail. So it's going to force them, especially the groups that are bored and they don't want to, you know, they get it. Now you've put them in a situation, okay, now what are you going to do? And then you can slowly tilt the favor into more balanced. Another way to do it too would be to be advancing to a point, just like you'd advance to a goal. You could start out with just, again, no defenders. How do we get from here to here? And I always do an activity where they have 3 items. If they drop an item, then they have to return and start again with that item. Their goal is to get all 3 to the other line without dropping it. If they get all 3, their group gets a point. In doing a point, the game continues once they get a point, because they're trying to get as many points as they can. So it continues that challenge. Now, you might get different strategies, though. I've seen groups make a line and do an assembly line, basically, and throw it up the field. Technically, that works. They're getting open, they're moving up field, they're finding space, and they're going towards the goal. That's when you then swap one of the players to a defender. And now you've caused that person who's now trying to change what's going on and actually trying to make them fail. Now they've got to come up with strategies. Okay, now how do you move up the field? Now what do you have to make sure? And that's usually when the open space starts coming in, is getting open usually will be a little more important when there's a defender, because you don't want to be by that defender anymore. So progressing through those steps, and then you work then towards, you know, a small-sided game, you know, 2-on-2 or a 3-on-3, where one team wants to try to get the ball to one line, the other team wants to try to get it to the other, but you've built to that, and you've paused and done check-ins where you're seeing, okay, they understand open space. They understand if somebody's open, you need to do a quick pass. You can't sit there forever and stare at the person and hope that, you know, that open pass will still be open. So you're looking for those kind of questions, but you also have to react to what you see and question each group. So again, that's where the roaming, going group to group and individually questioning each group is really effective. And then if there's a commonality, stopping the whole class and doing that same questioning again.
All right. So can you give me examples of sports that would be invasion games? Because I have something in my head, but I don't want to sound dumb. Is soccer an invasion game?
Yes.
So yeah, so you have soccer, you have ultimate, you have football, you have rugby, speedball, team handball. Pretty much wherever you have 2 sides of the field, one team is trying to invade the other side to score, it's an invasion game. So, you know, you have your tennis and stuff, that's not an invasion game because you never run to the other person's side and hit the ball. But in anything that's an invasion game, there's a goal or an end zone or, you know, a hoop. There's something to score at. And you're usually crossing a halfway line, which kind of signifies that you've invaded the territory.
Beautiful. So what I'm thinking about for this right now, for your builds, I would do get 4 cones. Everybody would be at a cone for a soccer pass, and we would pass the ball just around this square. Then to go the next build where you're talking about putting pressure in, one person would go off the corner. They would come in the middle. Now it'd be 3 versus 1, all square passes. When the ball goes from one side, the other person has to run. Now we're building up. And I think a lot of teachers do this naturally and don't recognize that this is teaching games for understanding. You know, we don't have to sit there and say, okay, 2 people face each other, kick the ball back and forth. Once you do it 25 times, back up 3 steps. Do it again for 50 times, back up 5 steps. And there, I think a lot of it does occur naturally, but we don't think about starting that from the.
I think the key, though, too, is that inquiry, that you're not telling them how to do it right or how to do it successfully strategy-wise. You're asking them to think about it and asking them, what did you do that allowed you to be successful? Or, you know, what do you need to do that will make it successful? And I think that's always the tricky part between the two. And even between you're just rolling out the ball, is if you're just sitting there watching and not asking what thoughts are going on and what process is going on, it's just rolling out the ball. And I think that's one of the dangerous things with TGFU. It sounds really good, but if you don't do any questioning and you're not asking your students to think, then, you know, you're not really doing it TGFU style. It's more of, you know, you're playing and hopefully you're getting it. I think, though, too, one of the big things to always remember is that transfer. So like with the activity with the 3 objects, I'll put frisbees down, a football down, a soccer ball down, and I don't care, you know, which ones they choose. I'll give them a big variety to give them some choice, but I want them to get it from one side or the other. I don't limit them to using their feet if they're using a soccer ball, but my soccer players will. They'll limit themselves. And I'll then ask them, you know, what's the challenge with this for this task? Because if you have that defender in there, if you have a very thin field, then it's very easy for the defender to poke it out of bounds, and that's that. And they have to start over and try again. So they start having to realize, oh, wow, it is tough to play this game soccer style because all it takes is a little poke on my soccer ball, and now we're starting over, versus a throwing game where really it would need to be intercepted, knocked down, or dropped.
Yeah, for me, this is where when you talk about stepping in, this is why I love technology and being one-to-one with Chromebooks. When you do ask these questions, and then you kind of help their thinking along, you're still guiding them from the side. Now my exit ticket is on Padlet. Now I can go, okay, what made you successful when blah, blah, blah. And I can make the Padlet in a minute and put it out through Google Classroom in another minute. So now I can tailor that to exactly the class that I have, because like you said, with TGFU, not all classes are on the same page. So some I might have to start with a little more basic questions and others a little more complex. So I really think that right here is where technology can have you document where their thought process is, and for future have them go back and say, hey, remember last week? Let's open the Padlet up for a provocation. This is what you said. Do you remember blah, blah, blah? Because sometimes you haven't done it in a week or a couple days or the weekend went by. So I really like that idea.
So I did want to go back just a step, because you did mention, you know, a lot of teachers are kind of doing these kind of concepts, and I think that's true. But I think a lot of times also we kind of focus on a sport, and, you know, we'll do like a sport unit, and at some point, you know, if we're doing a soccer unit, everybody will be playing soccer. So you'll do like a large scale 11-on-11 soccer game where some students that don't have the skill might not have the practice opportunity to touch the ball. You know, they'll kind of hide back. And I think with the constructivist approach and with TGFU, it kind of reduces that kind of social loafing, where I can just sit back and let all the skilled people do the job, and I won't be seen. I think when you're doing the small-sided games, you're giving those kids that need the opportunity to practice more touches on the ball. You're giving them you know, more opportunities to gain that skill that they need to be confident and competent in those activities. So that's one thing about TGFU that for me really stands out, is those small-sided games, giving everybody as much opportunity as possible and challenging them at their skill. Because Seth talked about it too. When you go from one group to another, you might change a rule for one group, you might not change it for the other because they're not ready to go yet. So you might add a defender with one. Let's say you're doing a soccer activity. You might add a defender with one group of 4, but the others are still cooperating, trying to get to that to the other side, because they have to practice on their passing. So that's one cool thing about TGFU is that it gives everybody, a different kind of challenge that they're ready for when they're ready for it.
Yeah, and we call that differentiation. You look at general education, and for me, the more I get involved in general education, the more I sit there and go, phys ed is so ahead of the curve in everything. We just never labeled it, and we never talked about it enough, because every game-based learning, gamification, what is gamification? Leveling up. That's literally competition. That's all it is. You won the game, good. You're going on facing the next team who won their game. Leveling up, playing people at your level. I mean, everything I look at in education, it's funny, comes back to us over here. So you're absolutely right. I love the differentiation. I love, Seth, when you talked about multiple projectiles, what you're comfortable with. Because if we're talking about learning concepts, do we care that much if it's a soccer ball, a football, a frisbee? Does that matter? What are we looking at? And a lot's going to depend on our grade level objective. But I like putting out the multiple things, saying, hey, you do it. Again, student choice, differentiation. I'm loving this. I'm loving this TGFU.
And jumping in on what Jorge said too, there's a lot of things you can play with. You can change the space of the size of the field. Basketball is a small court game. Whereas, if you're playing ultimate or soccer or something, you've got a really big area. So the size of your space allows finding open space to be easier or harder. So a bigger challenge would almost be a smaller field or a tighter field, whereas you make a bigger field and, it's very easy to find space. So when you're thinking about setting up your kids to discover those things and even have success, you can play with those things. And another thing you can play with is the rules and even how you score, how it's done. One thing that I think is awesome to do is your student who's the superstar, who if you were playing, it doesn't even matter sometimes, anything with a goal, they're the kid who scores 800 times, making that kid not allowed to score. Because what they'll start to learn to do is to set everybody else up. And how powerful that skill is for that superstar athlete is huge. That's a skill that goes from you being a good athlete to you being an athlete that now is at that level where, you have college coaches wanting you because you know how to set up your teammates and you know how to set up others for success, not just yourself. So you can start really challenging those individuals with those kind of rule changes. Another thing to piggyback off of Jorge is looking at things from a different perspective. I don't usually do like soccer in a row or ultimate in a row. I'll jump category to category and activity to activity and just change the task. So we'll use different equipment, get them used to it. I mean, they'll use like a rubber penguin to throw sometimes just to make it different. But again, the biggest key is that transfer, that no matter what they go from, they can transfer it from thing to thing and that it'll still work, and getting them to really accept and understand that. And I think the best way to do that is to not limit it to one sport, because they'll still think I'm good at ultimate frisbee because we did ultimate frisbee and I learned all these concepts for ultimate frisbee, so now I'm a good ultimate frisbee player. One of the things that Sarah Gittier-Hartman and I presented at the PE Institute was about teaching world games for understanding, bringing games that are completely different than what a lot of people see into their teaching games for understanding units, and bringing those in to basically change, flip the script on everybody and make them have to learn, whether it's, a striking and fielding game where bases are in different positions than what kids are used to, or, a game that Sarah presented and that we presented at Shape called Kiorahi, where it's actually a Maori game that was one of the precursors to rugby, and it's all played in a circle. And in doing that kind of a game, if you think about basketball, triangle offense, and in hockey, all the movement is pretty circular until you see that opening to score. So you're passing the ball around, moving the ball around. Doing a game that's in a circle forces you to do that. Whereas doing a game in like a field like soccer, when you think about your kids the first time they play soccer, they don't really look for the best goal. They go for it. It's like, oh, I'm at the end of the field where the goal is, now I got to kick it. So it gets them to start thinking in circular motions and different things by playing a game that's a little non-traditional. So those kind of games are great for TGFU because you don't have a kid who comes in and goes, well, my soccer coach told me I have to do this. So they don't think about the concepts, they just think about what coach said.
Yeah, that's a struggle all the time, and a lot of invasion games with my students is you don't always have to pass the ball forward to get ahead. They don't understand the concept. They don't understand switching fields will now open up angles for you. They don't understand possession is more important than where you are in the field sometimes. And we're always talking about that. So I do like the circle. And I know that folder that Sarah GH has, I could put that in the show notes as well, is fantastic. There's a ton of world games in there, and that is shared for free for everyone out there, which is awesome. All right. So
I just wanted to quickly say, and what's great about the world games for understanding that you guys do, I think it's phenomenal. But what's cool about that is that those novel games, those new games that the kids aren't necessarily familiar with, evens out the playing field. So some kid who might have been playing soccer since they're 2 years old and is the best soccer player out there, now all of a sudden they're playing a different type of invasion game that has the same kind of concept, but they're not familiar with with all of the things that are involved with that game. What I'm kind of thinking about is when I do fielding games, striking and fielding games, I do cricket. And so a lot of the kids in my school, they're not familiar with cricket. But so we'll start off with a kickball, small-sided kickball game, and then the next time I see them, we'll do something similar to a cricket game. And those kids who have been playing baseball for a long time, since a very young age, they're used to having the ball go straight to the plate, and that it's basically one level. And in a cricket game, it bounces, and so it throws them off completely. So again, it kind of levels the playing field, even though they might have been playing a similar game for a long time, but the strategy is still there.
It always makes me think about John Goodman in King Ralph. You ever see that movie, King Ralph?
Yeah, a long time ago.
Hits it, it goes right through the window. And Eric Metcalf has a fantastic cricket game that you can play with the equipment you probably have in your gym. I forget if he uses pool noodles or what he uses out there. So that's a guy to talk to over there. All right. So are there any builds we're missing? We started out with, all right, everybody succeeds. High success rate, 90+%. Then we put some builds where now there's some pressure on. So you're going to have some failures, but we're going to fail forward. We're going to learn. We're going to talk about, well, what worked? Why did it work? What didn't work? Why didn't it work? Check for the understanding. Document that some way. I talked about Padlet. Whatever way you want to document it works. Now, where do we go from here?
I think now you start talking about trying to win the ball. So when you're on defense, your goal is to win the ball. Your goal is to figure out a way to get possession back to your team and to be able to transition to being on offense. In addition to that, starting to focus on truly attacking a goal. So you're attacking wherever it is you score. So now it's, going after a goal, possibly with a goalie, and figuring out what decision-making has to happen now. So if you have a goalie, you can't just take the first shot you go after, because most likely they're looking at you, you're looking at them, they're going to stop you. And getting students to start realizing how important passing is within that realm. So now you're moving up in the levels. And honestly, it depends on your classes. I mean, you could have a class, you don't quite get there. You're not getting into like a full-on game of, choose your own, sport that you want to put in there. But if you get to that point, now you're looking at it through gameplay's lens, and you're looking at it through the lens of how are you successful now in this situation with this being your goal. So what are you doing to win the ball back? Getting them to start closing space, which comes into one of the shape standards, closing in that open space, recognizing that the more space you give offense, the more likely they are to maintain possession. That if you're on offense and you're trying to score, that you're trying to find the best lane. One of the coolest things this year was one of my high-level soccer students. She mentioned when we were talking about effective passing, she used the terminology passing lanes, that you're starting to look for lanes, open areas right towards where you want it to go. Same thing when you're trying to score. You want an open shot at the goal, not an obstructed. So getting them to start digging through those concepts in some kind of a game situation. One thing that I'm going to do this year, I got a bunch of iographers and some tripods, is using BAM video delay and setting those up near the scoring zones when we're at this point, and allowing the students to run over and peek at the screen and see what happened. So if they were successful scoring, see what happened. If they're unsuccessful, run over and see what happened. And really be able to then see, this is why you were successful or not, and get them to start thinking about it. So if they see, you know, the one kid who wants to try to always shoot at the goal, you know, didn't have a clear shot, threw it in, easily blocked. And then you see another student on their team was wide open with a great angle. Hopefully they're then being able to recognize that, discuss that, and then make better decisions in the future.
Yeah, on defense, also talking about the sideline there, how the sideline's your extra defender. Well, do you want him to go this way? Why? Do you not want him to go that way? Why? What can you do to prevent them from going here? How do you move them in the direction you want? Which I think is absolutely huge. I got a question for you though. How do you stop?
Yeah.
How do you stop your, for lack of a better word, your stud in the class, this athlete, the super athlete who no matter what you gave them, a Frisbee, a football, a soccer ball, you gave them a game that they never heard before, they're going to have success in pretty much anything they do. Their hand-eye coordination, their foot-eye coordination is fantastic. What can you do to have them involve the other students here? And Erica Duvall over here is talking about limit them. How do you do that in a way that's not going to stifle them and say, you can only touch it once, where they're not involved? What do you do there?
I think it is, though, where you bring in those rules of, you know, you're not going to shoot at the goal, but then pulling that student aside, having a quick conversation and saying, look, you're a great athlete. I respect how great you are. Here's my challenge to you. Try to make the rest of the team great. How can you do that? And how can you set everybody else up and get them to realize how powerful? You watch hockey, you watch, you know, soccer, how important an assist is, basketball. I mean, think about John Stockton. His career was built on assists. And realizing that when you can assist others, you might be more important than the person who scores all the time.
Isn't it?
Because it's a lot harder to put.
Don't they have two assists? Don't they have like the assist to the assist as a stat in there somewhere? I mean, that goes to show you right there. I mean, Michael Jordan, the greatest ball player of all time, he couldn't do it all by himself. He needed to give the ball up. So you're absolutely right about that with there. And I think maybe point differentials might come into effect there a little bit. All right, you're a kid who's really good at whatever you're doing. They get 1 point. Your medium kids get 5 points. Your beginners get 10 points. And a lot of times I let them pick where they're at. All right, are you a beginner? Are you middle? Are you expert? That way it's not me saying, yo, you suck. You're going to go over here and you're going to be a 10-pointer. And sometimes they go in different places than I would expect them. Like, really? You went to medium? I put you over there a little bit, but that's okay. I don't mind. I think there the way we keep point differentials might help as well. Jorge, what do you do to make sure that you don't have one student take?
Yeah, I do similar things. You know, secondary rules are really important sometimes where, like you said, point differentials might be different. They might be dribbling with the non-dominant hand. They might be doing something to challenge themselves. And again, with the assist, that's a great way to get the whole team involved. And again, heading towards the same goal. So yeah, definitely some of the greatest players, some of the greatest athletes, they make everybody around them better. So some of those kids who might have more experience in a certain activity, you know, that could be their challenge. Make everybody around you better to be the best team that you can be rather than just the best individual.
Yeah, and no matter what, I'm guessing this is the last build of TGFU, correct? We've culminated or sort of towards the end where we're playing these mini games at a very high level, working on the scoring part, the defense part. Where this is the end, correct?
Yeah, I mean, at the elementary level, it all depends. I mean, you're getting into small-sided gameplay now. It's more of a full game going on. Might even be a specific sport now. You're bringing in some specific rules. But there's even more still you could dig into. You could dig into, you know, zone defense versus man-to-man. You could dig into those deeper levels. So as students get older or as they show more knowledge, you can keep adding those pieces in. So I don't think it ever ends. And I think too, they're constantly evolving, because as their opponent gets better at defending, there's more evolution needed. And as they get better at passing, the defenders have to keep evolving and keep figuring out ways to be successful. Because eventually, you know, you're still having that battle. I mean, there's a reason why, you know, even pros games still have limited scores and stuff. You haven't reached this apex of knowledge because your opponent's gotten better too. So I think it's an endless cycle of that. And I think when you get into high school and stuff, you might be able to play into the full-on sized games and things like that. But I mean, once you get into that gameplay, you're getting some of the very key concepts. And I think the other piece would be testing out transfer. Testing are they transferring this? So one day you play a game of like team handball, and the next game you go to ultimate frisbee, and see if they're still able to transfer some of the ideas, you know, transfer some of the key concepts for effective passing, transfer advancing the field with a different object, and even in a different sport context, and see if they're still transferring or if they got stuck, and then kind of questioning your way through, why did this happen? You know, why aren't we advancing as well as we did yesterday with team handball, and digging into kind of some of their conflicts or things that they faced by doing a different sport.
Yeah, another part would be changing the projectile. So if we were doing soccer, now suddenly we're using the tennis ball. And you watch these kids who are fantastic kickers of a soccer ball. They'll bend it around. They'll go up, down, over, left, right. Give them a tennis ball. They're tripping over it. They're miskicking it. So I think you can add a little things to there. But I think you are right. You're never quite finished off there.
And I think that's an important note that Seth was saying, that, you know, really in elementary, I never go past a small-sided game. So we never play a full game of soccer. We never play a full game of cricket, because some of the kids aren't skilled enough to play those games. So we're all about developing the skill. We're all about, again, developing the confidence and competence in those different skills so that they can play those on their own if they choose to. So in my class, we never go beyond that.
Yeah, I don't know.
And I think too,
Go ahead, Seth.
it's easy to fall to the background. The more players you put into it, especially for elementary kids, the easier it is to push back, and then you're not gaining that ability because you have enough teammates to just hang. And that's kind of the key tipping point with the games with elementary kids, especially, is they need to be playing in a game where they're important. And if they're not participating, it's obvious, because if it's not, then they're not engaged and they're not going to probably gain what you want out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we don't want the kids hiding, which is there. And to be honest, I don't even know if at high school, I mean, we'd have to get a high school teacher in here, if they would do the full-sided games. Because when you talk about such a mixed bag of students, having an 11-on-11 soccer game, very, very difficult. I mean, Eric's over here saying, no, we don't. Very difficult to get a competitive 11-on-11 game where everyone's moving there. I mean, that's why we have our sports teams. That's why you do that. You go play rec if you want to do that, or competitive, or high school. For there, I like the small-sided games. All right, so let's wrap it up. Are there any last thoughts you have, Seth, for anyone who is like myself and we want to start doing TGFU and implement it and have success? Any advice for us?
I mean, I think it's one of those things where you have to enter it realizing that your questioning for that day might be horrible. You know, I've talked to, you know, Mel Hamada and, you know, Andy Hare and Andy Vasily and some of those guys. And there's just days where your questions don't work, or where you were trying to get to just doesn't happen. And you've just got to realize, you know, it's not scrap it and say, forget doing TGFU. This isn't working. It's you got to practice it. And it takes a lot of practice to sometimes ask the right questions and even help the kids get to the right point. I mean, inquiry definitely takes a lot of practice, and sometimes you're just off in even how you're asking them the question, and sometimes you're nailing it, and you can quickly see results. And you've just got to understand that over time, you're building them up. I mean, I love to do Andy Vasily's walk and talks, and I'll usually have an essential question for the day on a board. And I actually have tons of pictures of my students, because each class I take a picture of the board, wipe it clean, let the next class start on it. But getting their ideas too and seeing what they're really coming through. And I might do the essential question for yesterday is on the board today. And we start the class with the walk and talk as kind of the instant activity as they roll in, see what ends up on the board, and then, you know, go through, warm up the routine, and then talk about it. Say, okay, these are the things we're seeing. How'd those get there? Why'd those get there? The other piece is, I mean, for people who are really hesitant to enter the world of TGFU, do what you do, but start trying to add questioning in. Start trying to pull in some inquiry when you're watching the gameplay. Because I think one of the things that got me here was thinking about, I saw Mel Hamada's Phys Ed Summit session in one of the first Phys Ed Summits. And I was starting to realize, I'm like, I don't really ask a whole lot when it gets to gameplay. You know, I realized the gameplay is kind of a reward, but I didn't like it. And also I was frustrated because it was like, we built, you know, passing, and then we built passing with a defender, and then we put it all together in the game, and it was still a mess. Why is it still a mess? And this approach, I think, kind of cleans that up and makes things better for the students, and it's not a negative situation. And honestly, as a teacher, I just feel better when I see them doing it, and it starts looking more like what it should look like. So it's just a matter of playing with it, bringing it in, but realizing it's going to have value. And it's going to be a constant evolution where the first time you do the lesson, question didn't work or the activity didn't work, but you figure out what would make it better, and then you fix the activity for the next group. And I always tell my first group of the week, I'm like, I'm sorry guys, you're kind of my guinea pigs. so you're gonna see how this goes, and then the next group's gonna find out, and you know, hopefully it's not too far off for you guys. Yeah. And I'm pretty honest with them, but they're cool about it.
Jorge, any last pieces of advice for TGFU?
I think, you know, just like with anything else, if you're thinking about it, if you're interested in it, learn all you can about it and give it a shot. I mean, it's not going to hurt to give it a shot and see the difference in level of engagement of your students. And for me, you know, when I tried it, when I implemented it, the level of engagement of my students and the enjoyment of my students went way up. And so that says a lot to me. And then also, you know, I think not only does it make your students feel more valuable and more a part of the learning process, but it makes me as a teacher feel more valuable, because I think TGFU really emphasizes the art of teaching, and the questioning and the inquiry really emphasizes that. And so it makes me feel like I'm actually doing something. So again, like Seth said before, you know, it's easy to roll the ball out, and that's not what TGFU is. It's the questioning, it's the getting comfortable with with those kind of situations, and the planning out process that really kind of sets it apart. So again, if you're interested in doing it, learn all you can about it, pick up a couple good books about it. There's a lot of good webinars, and you know, there's stuff on the Phys Ed Summit about it. So I would say learn what you can and then go for it.
All right, both of you, thank you for coming. Episode 1 of BlabberMouths 101 TGFU. This will go live. Jorge will put it out as the podcast under the Voxcast, which is housed on the Phys-Edagogy website these days, which is fantastic. I learned an absolute ton. Like I said, for me personally, this is awesome because I want to implement it. I'm ready to. The how is always kind of killing me. How do I start? I think this is going to be a good resource for myself as well as others. So thank you both very much. And anyone watching live or on the YouTube channel or on the podcast, we appreciate your time. It is one of our most precious commodities, and the fact that you spent it with us is fantastic. So thank you very much to Jimmy and Eric for hanging in on the side. I know Grace popped in. And that is the end of our podcast. Thank you very much.